Airplane technology has made phenomenal progress since 1903, when Orville and Wilbur Wright flew the first powered heavier-than-air airplane at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. For decades after that, man gradually lost the real sensation of flying as he built extravagant airplanes that were bigger and faster. In the 1970s, hang gliders became popular and gave man a way to get in touch with how a bird must feel when drifting through the air. Hang glider enthusiasts like Mike Jacober were at the forefront of this new sport, and he was a member of the first hang gliding club in the United States. He also raced and rebuilt motorcycles, and when he saw a magazine picture of a hang glider outfitted with an engine, he caught the ultralight fever. In March 1992, pilots from Russia, Ukraine, and Czechoslovakia flew flex-wing ultralights called UFO Antares across the Bering Strait to Nome, Alaska. Jacober and Joel Wallace, a fellow ultralight pilot, bought two of these craft when they soon discovered they were superior to American ultralights. Jacober asked Wallace and his stepson, Matthew Howard, who had successfully climbed Denali and skied down from the summit, to accompany him on an expedition to fly an ultralight over Mount Denali's summit. During the next 6 months, resources were gathered and a plan was developed to prepare for this expedition. The following is an account of this first ever ultralight expedition to the summit of Mount Denali. Anticipation coursed through the minds of the party and excitement filled the air on the day the expedition began. Besides its flying ability, the Antares is very portable and lends itself to quick assemblage. On this warm spring morning, Jacober and Wallace construct their ultralights with relative ease and ready the craft for the next leg of the expedition, the Kahiltna Base Camp, located at 7,200 feet above sea level.
Safety. Warehouse someplace. I was laying back there in a junk pile and I thought, oh no. We're not throwing that one away.
You requisitioned it?
Yeah, I've had it for almost 20 years. This little old pup here, man.
I'm just excited. I think it's going to be great.
In preparation for the chilling temperatures of higher altitudes, the men dress warmly in layers of clothing. While the ultralight's windshield will deflect a lot of the cold air, the open cockpit offers little to keep the pilots warm. The trip to the Kahiltna Glacier Base Camp will not be that cold, but the eventual flight in the frigid air over Denali's summit will take more survival gear than the pilots are wearing today. The UFO has a 34-foot flexible wingspan that extends over 165 square feet, and at 38 miles per hour, the airplane can glide 10 miles forward for every 1 mile it descends. Its top airspeed is 60 miles per hour and can fly about 2 hours at cruising speed on its 5-gallon fuel supply. Jacober and Wallace take off flawlessly from the Talkeetna Airport, ascending into the scattered cloudy skies. Drifting peaceably above the bold cousins and neighbors of Mount Denali, the ultralights enter the Kahiltna Basin. Circling high over the landing strip, the flat, boundless sheet of whiteness of the Calhiltna Glacier, the airplanes set down at base camp and achieved their first objective. In planning for this first ever ultralight flight to Denali Summit, Jacober had significant hurdles to overcome in aircraft design, weather, and FAA regulations. To guard himself against the effects of thin air, Jacober mounted an oxygen tank with a two-stage regulator, and in case of some mid-air catastrophe, he would rely upon a rocket-deployed 28-foot parachute to bring him and his machine to safety. Another stumbling block was the size of the fuel tank. Under ideal conditions, the ultralight might make it to the summit, but would not have enough fuel to complete the return trip. Jacober would have to go at less than full throttle and progress toward the summit by surfing the air currents. The greatest challenge with design was how to keep the engine running in higher altitudes where the lack of oxygen causes the engine to run too rich with fuel and eventually stall. To solve that problem, Jacober developed a mixture control device that was attached to two cables and mounted on the Antares near the left shoulder. Now he could adjust the fuel-air mixture while in flight. For high-altitude temperatures that could reach a wind chill of 100 below, Jacober would wear thick, long underwear beneath layers of clothing that would be covered with a goose-down suit. A helmeted mask would cover his face, and layers of gloves with overmitts would conceal his hands. The Antares windshield and fairing would also protect him from the elements.
It was great. Did you come through little Switzerland down there? Is that where we're?
Well, whatever it was, man, there were some big mountains out there.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And you flew between those two?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Up over the top.
we were shooting through some gaps there. It was pretty
Yeah.
nice.
Pretty awesome.
Pretty
yeah.
nice.
Well, all I could think of was, how the hell do you know where you are?
Well, you just keep hoping.
Just
Along.
keep going up towards it.
I hope
Just get
that's
up
not what
towards
he's
the big
gonna
one.
tell me.
It's like driving on the freeway for you, though, eh?
Yeah.
So I wonder what the mixture control does at 17,000.
It still works. I've had it at 17.5 and it still works. And I'm still climbing 300-400 feet a minute. We really appreciate the ride up here with all the gear and everything. That's great. And we'll be up around for the week and see if we can't make the summit.
The final obstacle was complying with FAA regulations, which would require an aircraft flying above 18,000 feet to fly on instrument flight rules and under supervision of air traffic officials. Jacober, however, found an exception in the rules that allowed an ultralight to fly at that altitude, providing the craft is within 1,500 feet of the ground. Flying that close to the mountainside while maneuvering through the air currents would place him precariously near jutting outcrops of rock and deep glacial crevasses. In a country as hostile as Denali National Park, no expedition can have enough wisdom in its camp. Jacober's stepson had prior experience on a mountain climbing expedition to Denali Summit, so he was appointed the camp manager in charge of logistics and safety. Under Howard's watchful eye, the expedition settles in for the evening as the campsite is readied for the night.
Oh, no problem.
South Summit.
It's right there. Yeah.
It's right there.
I know. That's why we came to base camp.
This is Mount Francis right here.
So we got staked over by
Crossing.
With threatening clouds hanging in the sky, snowbanks are made to protect the tents, and equipment is arranged so everything can be found if the glacier is strafed by a windy snowstorm. Up here, the wind can howl for days and bury a campsite within hours. In a scene not captured on video, Jacober went up for one more flight for the day to record some video for a party member. He was forced to land abruptly when his Antares would not respond in flight. A slight seam of ice had formed on one of the wings and went undetected during Jacober's pre-flight inspection. As Jacober lowered the craft to within 10 feet of the glacier surface, the UFO dropped suddenly, bounced, and flipped. The UFO sustained some damage, but Jacober was not hurt and was undaunted by the crash. Realizing that he had had parts to repair the airplane back in his shop in Anchorage, Jacober worked under the moonlight dismantling the ultralight. The next day, he caught a ride with a glacier pilot to Talkeetna, jumped in his vehicle, and drove to Anchorage. He picked up his spare parts, drove back to Talkeetna, and caught an airplane back to the glacier. That night, he readied his ultralight for its flight to the summit, planned for the next day. Months of planning were about to be tested. Finally, the day had arrived for the intrepid pilots to make their attempt on the summit. A brilliant sun begins to lip over the mountain peaks surrounding the basin, waking the expedition from their sleep.
Morning, Dave. Yeah. Yes, this is too much fun.
High up on the mountain slopes, wind buffet the cornices, creating veils of snow that flap in the air blasts. The corridor to Denali is blocked temporarily by a storm moving through the route from the glacier to the summit, and the pilots must delay their venture. One lift in the weather enables them to go for a test run to check their machines and to map out the air patterns. It was a successful test run, but high-altitude storms will postpone the summit attempt for the day. The next morning, the clouds unload their bounty and the expedition is camp-bound.
So we're here on Kahiltna Glacier, Mount McKinley, close to Mount McKinley in Alaska. We're at 7,200 feet altitude. We knew that there was no way in the world we'd be able to come up to this altitude and fly around the summit of Mount McKinley without some means in which to adjust mixture on the carburetors, because at that altitude they just won't run, because there's just too much, not enough air. Too much fuel, not enough air. So over the last several years, I designed and built a mixture control assembly, which goes onto a bean carburetor with a slight modification. The only physical outside thing that you notice on the carburetor is this cable comes up out of this is the throttle cable. This is a mixture control cable. It comes out right next to your throttle ferrule. Comes up, out, and into a convenient place where I can use the knob to turn the needle inside. Right here. So I'm able to use the cable to turn the mixture control. What I'm able to do is, by pulling the top of the cap of the carburetor off, slide the slide out. So what I have is I have the mid-range needle right here. It's attached to a special brass screw, and that brass screw is attached to that cable, which runs up through this housing here. By turning the knob, I'm able to raise and lower the mixture control needle from full rich, which is where it's at now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns to full lean. That's the same extent that you would have if you were using the clip in the stock needle. I've got a 158 main jet, and then you go in just a little deeper. And I've got a 2.72 needle jet. Okay. This needle jet and this main jet have to be set up for your altitude density wherever you happen to live at, your temperature altitude density. So if I was flying at 60 degrees at sea level, I could easily get away with just using stock jets. But at 7,200 feet, at 32 degrees, and sometimes much lower temperature than that, I'm going to have to use my jet correction chart to make sure that these jets are correct. And what that does is that allows this needle jet, this jet needle, to be adjusted so that I can go from full rich to full lean, and I can keep the jet approximately in the middle clip, or 2 to 3 turns out. So now that I've adjusted for my jet correction, or for my altitude density, I'm going to go from a 2.72 and 158, I'm going to go to a 2.70 needle jet. To a 150 main jet. And I have to do this in both carbs. By the way, this is not a screen for debris. This is a screen for bubbles only. It has to be in there. Slide it on, put your cap up, snap it into place. Okay, now that I've adjusted for correct altitude density, now I can start the engine, and my goal is to put the needles at full rich, or all the way up, so that I can make the engine 4-cycle. In other words, it's running so rich that it will only fire every other top dead center. So then I can make it 4-cycle. I know it's too rich. I know that it's visibly right when it's running too rich. And then as it warms up and it's running too rich, what I'll do is I'll bring it up to about 4,000 RPM, and I'll lean it until it runs smooth and comes up to power. And that will tell me exactly where it's supposed to be. And then, of course, as I ascend and go to higher and higher altitudes, all I have to do is adjust the needle as necessary, either listening to the engine or looking at the EGT.
At last, with all systems on go, the eager pilots zoom off the glacier into a soft blue sky. To record the adventure, Jacober has mounted a video camera on his ultralight and took along a 35mm as backup. Despite running into early turbulence, Jacober continued to climb in sweeping circles above the Kahiltna Glacier, eventually losing Wallace. Soon, Jacober was hovering over 12,800-foot Mount Crossan, where he found a zone of pure tranquility. Below him, cotton ball clouds clung to the mountaintops. From his vantage point above Crossan, he could see the extended south buttress leading toward the summit of Denali. He steered the ultralight in Denali's direction and began the journey to the summit. As he rose in altitude, Jacober adjusted the fuel-air mixture, and the UFO Antares purred steadily on, closing the distance to Denali and creeping higher and higher. He established himself above a distinct ridge that led to Denali's summit. Jacober glanced at his thermometer and saw that it was 25 below zero. There was a strong 25 to 35 mile-per-hour wind rolling over the ridge that he knew would provide his craft with a steady lift. Relying on his experience in hang gliding, Jacober surfed his ultralight back and forth across the ridge, and the unfaltering gust elevated him even higher. For another 2 miles, he continued to play the air current that was flowing over the buttress. The final climb, a precipitous 3,000-foot mountain wall, forced him to change his fuel-conserving climbing strategy. Now Jacober had to motor with power and ascend in circles that brought him dangerously close to the mountainside. As he crested the summit ridge, his face shield iced up, and the numbing cold bit into his aching fingers. The true summit was just a little farther northwest, and he began to question whether he should push on. The Antares, however, continued to hum and climb, until Jacober found himself above the summit. He made it! He was the first person ever to fly an ultralight over the 20,320-foot summit of Mount Denali. Jacober quickly took a photo of his altimeter and of the summit. He later discovered the 35mm had frozen during the flight, as well as the video camera, losing precious film and video. Jacober turned his craft and began descending on the 8-mile journey back to the Kahiltna Glacier. When he flew to about level with the summit, he reversed the ultralight to face Denali and shot 3 more photos. Having accomplished his goal, Jacober killed the engine on the Antares at 20,000 feet and glided soundlessly for a half hour back to the Kahiltna Glacier and a jubilant ground crew awaiting him.
I know this guy. Him and I are like this.
Yeah.
And he happens to be the first guy to summit Mount McKinley.
In an ultralight.
In an ultralight.
Well, what happened? What happened when he took off? You watched him almost the whole time, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I tried to anyways. He took off, went over here, circled here, went higher, 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 went over there, went up higher, then we lost him.
It's getting pretty cloudy up there.
Yeah.
Dear Mike, I've been meaning to write you all summer long, at least since reading about your spectacular adventure on Mount McKinley. And finally, after a hectic fall hunt, I find the moment. In a world of 5 billion people, and after nearly every spot on Earth has been probed, it is, to me at least, a wonder that anyone today can be the first at anything. But you are living proof. So I send you my congratulations on such a wonderful first. It comes only after years of dedication to a sport that you dearly love. There may be others in the future that will share with you the thrill of Mount McKinley from above in the smallest of our flying machines, but they all will know that Mike Jacober was there first. Congratulations. Kind regards. Wilson Gay.
Patty, we need to thank you
We love you.
for this wonderful food.
Oh,
You
it's
did a
wonderful.
super double overhead bitchin' great job on fixing this food up.
And
we love it.
yes, we couldn't have survived without
It's
it.
the best expedition food I've ever had.
Bar none.
Bar
Par
without a
excellence.
And the next time we do one of these expeditions, you're hired.
You can bet your sweet Pippi.
That's gonna pay you.